Hello, everyone. It's Daniel, and this is day 17 of my 30-day video challenge. Maybe just as a little check-in, I am still enjoying making these videos, and I'm kind of getting more spontaneous with the topics that I'm choosing. The first couple days I had, maybe some notes, some things I wanted to say, but now I'm kind of just going from my intuition, and I'll think about these videos throughout the day and kind of brainstorm, but I really am just kind of speaking totally spontaneously here. I don't have any notes. I don't have any plans. The only thing I wanted to talk about today was kind of what, to me, my personal definition, but what is meditation and why bother with it? Someone asked me the other day if I meditated when I was bored or had nothing to do, and I kind of just, maybe I didn't feel like going into the full explanation, so I just said, haha, yes. But there's a lot more to it, in my opinion. At least personally, like the reasons that I have a daily meditation practice. It's way more than just doing something to pass the time. I actually get tremendous value out of meditation, and it feels good to practice that every single day. So I'll just tell you a little bit about kind of why I do that, and what it's done to me, or, what benefit I've received. So the the main benefit to me for meditation has been really just helping with my anxiety. I probably, when I was like 18 or 19, I probably would have qualified for like depression or anxiety or one of those negative emotion diagnoses. But for whatever reason, I didn't want to get medicated. I didn't want to take pills. I didn't want to take prescription antidepressants. So I just kind of tried to figure out my own way, which, by the way, I wouldn't necessarily suggest. Like if you are suffering with severe depression or anxiety, or like bipolar or something, you shouldn't rely solely on meditation as a solution. Although it can certainly help, you should definitely consult with a mental health professional, someone who's more trained than maybe just a meditation teacher would be. But I was primarily using meditation as a tool to kind of cope with anxiety and depression, depression-like symptoms. And I would say there's been a pretty significant improvement. Like when I was 18 or 19, I was a total neurotic mess. Kind of like using drugs and alcohol to self-medicate, and feeling really existentially confused, feeling really anxious all the time, and a lot of it has to do with kind of that part of your brain that addicts. It forms habits. It wants to, once it finds a way of gratification, it wants to keep doing that thing again, which of course can become a problem. But just general also like existential dread was a problem. So it wasn't necessarily like a craving, but a confusion, a misunderstanding about what is a human's place in the world, and really worrying about kind of global catastrophes, the climate crisis, and nuclear annihilation, to mention a couple. And the effect of meditation has been not that those things go away, but there's certainly less of an issue. And it's not that I don't care anymore about the environment or nuclear annihilation, quite the opposite. I'm still very troubled about these kinds of things. So maybe troubled isn't actually the right word. Like, I'm concerned, but I'm no longer like obsessed, and I'm no longer depressed about those things. So, and kind of the way that happens is there's a process, or there's multiple processes that go on in meditation, and it's not just about sitting quietly in a room, and it's not even really about sitting there concentrating breathing. The real fruit of meditation, the real payoff, is basically two things, and we're going to call them like insight and kind of like emotional purification. So those are kind of the two broad categories of really like the most powerful benefits and the real goal and the result of a good meditation. So emotional purification is basically just working with acceptance, working with equanimity, especially equanimity with our own emotions, with our own reactions to things. So this isn't the kind of equanimity where, you know, we're seeing someone on the street getting robbed and we don't do anything. We're just like, you know, just like sitting like a Buddha. But rather we are calming our own thought process and our own reaction to kind of the emotional sensations that come up. Again, this is not to get rid of emotions, and it's not so that we don't care about anything or what's going on in the world, but it's so that it's basically for emotional balance. Another way of thinking of emotional purification is just working on emotional balance, like learning how to interpret the signals that are coming into our consciousness that are felt as emotions, learning to process those signals more effectively. And so meditation can really help with that. You know, there's a lot of trial and error. There's a lot of like sitting there trying to stay calm while you're having an emotional reaction. And then there's also an aspect of the meditation where you're actually learning to, or well, your brain is learning to rewire itself. For example, people who have practiced a lot of meditation tend to have a smaller amygdala, and the amygdala, excuse me, the amygdala is one part of the brain, a major part of the brain that's active when people are engaged in like violent acts or defensive aggression, sometimes even sexual aggression. You know, sexual approach for men is mediated in part by the amygdala. So this part of the brain actually gets smaller, and its tendrils, its connections to the rest of the brain also atrophy to a certain extent. So, of course, people who meditate can still feel anger. It's not like that is completely gone. But the signal is a little bit weaker, which basically means your conscious attention maybe has a little more power. Because as we all know, when we're possessed by an angry state or rage, our decision making, our ability to think clearly kind of goes offline. And I mean, you could just do a thought experiment. Like, what if even when you were at your most angry, your most rage, you could still think clearly and make the right decision? Like, even that little bit, how would that change your life? How would that improve the situation on this planet if, you know, if a large number of people did that? And so, yeah, let's talk about insight a little bit. So we talked about emotional purification, which is just kind of this internal process, but insight is related to emotional purification, but insight is just the process by which, you know, the functioning of our mind and the functioning of the world become more clear. So, in a way, like all of Western science is attempting to develop insight, but they're only developing insight into the material world, into the external world. So meditation could be thought of as the interior science, as the first person perspective science, the science of consciousness and how the mind works. So yeah, a lot of times when I'm sitting in meditation, I'm actually just, I'm not actually focusing on breathing. I'm not focusing on sensory experience, but I'm actually just paying very close attention to where my attention goes, how it goes from being distracted to being calm, how it goes from having no emotional reaction to having a very strong emotional reaction, within a second. Even if we're just sitting there meditating, like all of a sudden you can be in an emotional state. And it's kind of cool to continually look for more and more subtle details into how that process works. Like how do we go from just having a thought to being outrageously excited or outrageously angry or something. And that's what insight is like, as understanding the little microscope. It's like taking a microscope to your own attention, a microscope to your own consciousness, and looking at the most microscopic level, or looking at different levels of analysis outside of what the narrative of our thoughts would normally have us think about reality. So maybe it's important to note here that Carl Jung would say this, the Buddhists would say this, but 99% of people, 99% of the time, are not actually in contact with their own mind or the external reality. They're actually, in a way, kind of almost, Jung would say, living inside of a projection of their own mind. 99% of people, 99% of the time, are kind of living in this daydream fantasy thing where they, instead of seeing what is really going on, they're seeing a skewed and filtered version of what they want to be going on, or what something in their mind is projecting outwards. And this is, it's a terrifying thought. And it's kind of like solipsist, or Kantian, because we can't even say like what is going on in the world if we happen to be living inside of a dream space or a mental projection or a daydream of some kind. Then what's really there? Like what's going on? And then of course also, how does the mind create that? If in some way we are living in a projection, how the hell are we doing it without knowing that we're doing it? And these are the kinds of questions that insight meditation, or the result thereof, is trying to answer. And it's more of a, like, it doesn't have a specific answer, but each person kind of has as you meditate, you become accustomed to, you start to get a sense of when and how the mind is doing this projection, how the mind creates and constructs reality. It's quite a fascinating thing to, once you build up a certain level of concentration, you start turning that inward and looking at your own attention, and things start to get really, really strange really fast. Because we're kind of hijacking this attention center of our mind. We're reprogramming it, or exapting. It's an interesting word I learned. But we're exapting this capacity to pay attention to the external world, and we're kind of repurposing that mechanism to turn inward. And it's a very counterintuitive thing. It's a tricky thing to kind of get the feel of, because it's not natural. Like, what's natural is for the mind to be scanning the environment, always looking, always thinking. What's not natural is to use your attention to investigate attention or awareness itself. And when you do that, it starts to get very strange. It's like, have you seen if you take a video camera and turn it towards the monitor that is displaying the video, you start to get into this very strange feedback loop where the camera is, absorbing the photons that were just output from its own lens. And so instead of turning the camera outwards, it gets turned into its own observing point. You get us into this really strange feedback cycle. All kinds of interesting things will display on the screen if you make that backward step. And that is essentially what starts to happen if you turn the attention inwards, is you start to get all kinds of interesting feedback, which can give you some indication as to what kind of processes must be going on inside your head. And this is all basically called insight. So when they talk about insight in Buddhism, another word for insight is like vipassana. So if you hear that word vipassana, that's the Sanskrit word that is translated as insight in English. Or in Tibetan, it's called lagdong. And what it means is insight into the nature of consciousness, or insight into the nature of the mind, and how it constructs experience, how it operates in the world. So really, insight is it's being used as a technical term, like it means something specific, but it's insight into the operations of consciousness. When you get the emotional purification going and you get the insight going, basically, if you're doing it right, your entire perspective on life starts to change. Like things just start opening up to you it becomes obvious that the accessible universe, or the part of the universe that is relevant to you, starts to just open up. You start to open up to levels of creativity, wisdom, knowledge, that would otherwise likely be inaccessible. And it is a combination of all these things. There's the emotional purification. It makes your body and your mind work smoothly together, and also really relieves a huge amount of tension. The insight practices just really help you understand how your mind works. And I mean, it feels like putting on an Iron Man suit. Have you seen the Marvel movie Iron Man, right? It's like you're inside of this like hyper advanced machine, and we're just learning how it works. And when you learn how it works, you start to recognize that you're actually a whole lot more than you thought you were, and it's pretty cool. Those are kind of the two fruits of meditation that I think are really important, and also like practical. Like they reduce the ordinary suffering, they make the person more effective in the world. So I think this is all very important. And to kind of loop back to this comment about, is meditation just a thing that you do when you're bored? The answer is unequivocally no. It's something that I actually deliberately have carved out time every single day of my life, basically for the past 9 years, to practice. I didn't run away to a monastery. I don't sit around for 16 hours a day and meditate, but this is something that I make a deliberate effort every single day to do a meditation practice, and it feels good. I mean, I think it actually accelerates my psychological growth in other areas. It helps me pay attention more. It's made learning and thinking about math easier. It's like supercharging your brain or something, like adding a fuel booster to the gas tank or something. It takes time. It takes practice. It takes a significant amount of time at first for the emotional purification and the insight to actually really get started. You have to have a pretty good level of concentration first, or at least be able to relax and sit still for extended periods of time, which for some people is difficult. So it takes some initial investment, and then after that, it's just like, it's a thing that I wouldn't want to stop doing. Like, it's definitely not just a habit, and it's not just out of boredom. It's not just a random thing that I do for the sake of doing. It has deeply, deeply powerful, like, psychological, spiritual, mental, existential benefits, and so that's why I do it. I'm going to go ahead and end the video here, and I will see you guys tomorrow for day 18.